Hey guys, so welcome back to the full stack web development course part 7. So last time we left off by understanding how to write CSS in 3 different ways. Alright, so today we are actually going to go through IDs and classes. Now what are IDs and classes? So these are actually attributes that you can provide to every HTML tag that you define inside your HTML document. So this is how our web page actually looked like when we actually worked on it the last time. Alright, so and previously we also had some inline CSS defined for it. And this time I'm actually going to go ahead and delete the inline CSS. Alright, because it's quite unconventional to write inline CSS. Alright, you only need to write inline CSS when it's really necessary. Alright, because writing inline CSS actually makes your HTML quite messy and you don't want that in your HTML document. Alright, and that's why it's considered unconventional. So for us, we are actually going to delete them. Alright, so now as you can see that I have gotten rid of all the inline CSS, and now we have something new in front of us, that is IDs and classes. So in every HTML tag, you can provide an attribute ID and you can provide an attribute class. Now the basic difference between IDs and classes is that ID should be unique, whereas classes might not be unique. Alright, so as you can see here that for ID, I have provided here header. Now, if I go ahead and copy and paste the same thing in paragraph, now this is not correct because two HTML tags are actually having the same identity, which should not happen. Alright. So IDs will only be unique. So if you want to define any ID for this paragraph, you can actually go ahead and change that header for say paragraph. So now your h1 tag has an ID header and now your paragraph has an ID paragraph. Alright. Now if we look at classes, so you can also define a class attribute for every HTML tag. And here for my heading, I have actually defined a class heading. And the same I've done for this another h1 tag which we have defined here below our paragraph. So as you can already see that you can actually give the same name for that specific class, and any CSS targeted to that class would get attached to those elements in which you have actually defined that class. Alright, so I mean you will understand this in a couple of minutes. Alright, and the same I've done for my paragraph. I've defined a class para. Alright. Now, what is the role of IDs and classes? Well, with the help of IDs and classes, you can actually target elements with specific CSS. Alright, now previously you were targeting CSS by just defining the tag. Alright, let's say h1 or p. Alright, so what this would do is that it would target every h1 tag in your HTML. Alright, and you might not want that in your web page when it actually grows into multiple pages. Alright, so you want some specific classes defined for some specific h1s and some other classes defined for some other specific h1s. Alright, so the CSS that we actually wrote in the previous video, the external CSS, is also not the one that you are actually going to see quite often. Alright, the CSS we are actually going to write today is the one you will see 99% of the time. Alright, so now as you can see that I have defined an ID and a class for every specific tag in our HTML document. So why not add a targeted CSS specified for ID and class? Alright, so what we are actually going to do is that just remove this h1 from here because we are not going to use any tag specific CSS. We are actually going to use class and ID specific CSS. Alright. So now that we have a class heading defined for our h1, so let's just go ahead and target this particular CSS, that is color and border, to our class heading. Now, how do you specify that? You are actually going to write dot heading. And this is actually going to be considered as a class targeted CSS. Alright. So when you actually specify anything with a dot, you are actually specifying a class. Now you would actually ask that how you would target an ID. Well, an ID is targeted by an hashtag. So classes are actually targeted with a dot and IDs are targeted with a hash. Now, all these classes and headings that I have defined here are not predefined. Alright, you can actually give them any name that you want. Alright, you can attach your name, your roll number, anything that you want. So now if we go ahead and look at our web page that's currently live, so as you can see that our class and ID targeted CSS is actually working. Alright, So the font color, that is the color, and the border are actually getting reflected with the heading class, and this background of our paragraph is actually getting reflected by our ID paragraph. So as you can see that I have given the ID paragraph to our paragraph tag. So what I'm actually going to do is actually going to copy it and actually paste it in the last h1 tag and actually go ahead and save that. So now we have an ID conflict. All right, there is no unique ID paragraph in our HTML document. So now let's go ahead and see on our web page that will our CSS get reflected or not. Alright, so as you can see that the background CSS that was attached to ID paragraph is actually getting reflected for both the IDs attached to the paragraph tag and the h1 tag. Alright, even though we have an ID conflict. Alright, so you might think that it's actually correct to specify IDs for two different tags. But let me tell you that you would run into problems if you actually go ahead and define same IDs for different tags. Alright, now why do I say that? Because when you go ahead and write JavaScript and actually want to target a specific element with a specific ID, you are going to run into an ID conflict. Alright, because there is a function in which you can grab elements with a specific ID in JavaScript. Alright, and if there are multiple tags with that same ID, you are actually going to get an error message. So giving the same ID to different tags is completely wrong. Alright, so if you want to give IDs to different tags, go ahead and give them unique IDs, alright, because they are their identifiers. That's something that makes them unique, alright. And if you actually want to give them the same name, go ahead and attach a class to them. Alright, that's what classes are for. Alright, if you want to give the same name to different tags, go ahead and attach a class to it. So we are actually going to go ahead and change this ID paragraph to actually something different. Alright, let's say a head ID. So we are actually going to go ahead and change this ID paragraph to an ID head and then attach it to our h1. And now this is absolutely correct and you won't run into any errors when you actually write your JavaScript. Alright, so now let's go ahead and define a targeted CSS for each of these IDs and each of these classes. Alright, so as you can see that I've actually defined targeted CSS for each of these classes and each of these IDs. Alright, so as you can see that for our heading class, we actually have the color as yellow and a border as 10 pixel solid yellow. So it's going to be a 10 pixel solid yellow border. Alright, now if you go ahead and look at our para class, now it has a border of 20 pixel solid blue violet. Alright, so it's going to be a 20 pixel wide thick border. Alright, and it's going to also have a border radius of 10 pixel. Alright, and you are actually going to see what border radius actually does. Alright. And then for our paragraph ID, we actually have the background color as pale violet red. And for the ID header, we actually have the background color as #343434. And then for our ID head, we actually have the background color orange. Alright. Now you might ask that in all the other colors, you have actually provided an actual color, but here you have actually given a hash value. What is that? Well, this is actually an hex value. Alright. So with which you can actually define colors. Alright, so you can actually go ahead and Google for a converter which can actually provide you an hex value for different RGB values. Alright, so rather than specifying a proper yellow, you can actually define some other specific yellow that you want with the help of an hex value. Alright, so this is actually not black, this is somewhat near black, as you can see in this color selector. Alright, so with this #343434, it's somewhat here. It's not completely black, but it's somewhat here. So now that we have all our classes and IDs styled, now let's go ahead and check them out on our web page. Alright, so now as you can see that with the heading class, we are actually providing a yellow border and a yellow color, alright, which is attached to each of our h1s. So you can actually see this h1 has a yellow color and a yellow border, and this one also has a yellow color and a yellow border. Alright. And now that we have a different ID for each of these h1s, so we have a different background for each one of them. Alright, so you can actually see that #343434 in the first h1 and the orange background for the another h1. Alright, and now if we go ahead and look at our paragraph tag, you can actually see that we actually targeted that background with its ID paragraph, and its class para, it actually had a 20 pixel solid blue violet border. Alright. And we also provided a border radius of 10 pixels. So you can actually see that the border actually has a radius on its edge. Alright, it now not actually has an actual edge, but actually has a curvature on the edge. All right, and that's what you actually style with the help of border radius. All right, so higher the value, the higher the curvature you are actually going to provide it with. So here I've actually given it a 10 pixel border radius. All right, and you can actually go ahead and play with border radius in your own free time. So for now, we actually know how to give IDs and classes and how to target CSS with the help of these IDs and classes. Alright, so now I don't want you guys to think that you can only attach one class inside of the class tag. Alright, so you can actually attach multiple classes inside of this class attribute. Alright, so let's go ahead and actually attach another class for our p tag, that is the paragraph tag. Alright, so let's go ahead and attach some font styling to it. Alright, so what I'm going to do is that I'm actually going to create a new class named as font para. Alright, with which we are actually going to style its font. Alright, so let's go ahead and save that and actually go ahead and create a new class specific CSS for our font para. Alright, so now as you can see that I've actually defined some CSS for our font para class. Alright, so I've actually defined a font size which is of 30 pixels. I've also defined a font weight which is going to be bold. That is how much thick is actually your font going to be. Alright, you can also provide a value in here, but I've straight up given it a bold attribute. And finally, we are actually going to keep our font in the color of white. So we are actually going to attach a color white to it. Alright, so now let's go ahead and check out how our paragraph is actually looking like. So now if we go ahead and check out our web page, our font is actually 30 pixels large. It's in bold and it's also in the color of white. Alright, so you can not only attach one but multiple classes inside of one class attribute. Alright, so you can actually give another space and write another class and attach some other specific CSS to it. Alright, so you can also go ahead and attach the heading class to the paragraph tag if you want to. But if we talk about IDs, as I've told you before, IDs are unique, so it's only going to be one single unique value. But in the class attribute, you are actually given the whole freedom to give them the same name, attach multiple classes, to, give you the full flexibility of how to style your page with your heart's content. Alright, so now we know how to write CSS in 3 different ways and how to attach CSS to our HTML elements with the help of IDs and classes. Alright, so until now, you were actually just following my CSS that I've actually written in my external CSS style sheet. So you only know these few CSS properties, all right? So let's say border or color or font size, font weight. So, and in each video, I'm actually using some new CSS property. We are actually going to start some videos that are going to be specifically targeted towards CSS, in which I'm going to teach you the complete CSS from start to finish and only the CSS that you are actually going to use in your projects. All right, the most oftenly used CSS. And in those videos, I'm also going to introduce you to Flexbox, which is the most widely used CSS property, I would say, out there, and it's the easiest one to use also, with which you can actually create any web page design that you want. And it's actually easy to use and it actually makes your life very much easier. And some people actually have difficulty to center a div. All right, and that's what Flexbox does easily within let's say, I don't know, 3 statements or 2 statements, I guess. So all that we are actually going to do in the coming videos. So until then, keep chilling at the Code Cove.